Good people YouTube, I'm the Watch Idiot, and this one is interesting because when this here SPB453, the updated version of the super popular 143, SPB143, was released, I wasn't that enthused. The 143 never quite landed for me, and I figured it would be the same story for this one since it's basically the exact same watch, right? But then in my Black Bay 41 monochrome video, someone suggested that I compare that to the 453, and at that point I had completely forgotten about the 453, that it even existed. But I figured that I might as well give this watch a shot and then share my experiences with you guys since I conceptually like it, and I was also really curious about the Black Bay 41 monochrome comparison, so yeah, stay tuned for that. Fast forward to now, I've been wearing this more than my Black Bay 41 monochrome, and I don't want to take it off my wrist. I mean, I felt sad taking it off when I was going to sleep the first night, and I was legit excited to wear it the next morning. I mean, this type of reaction very rarely happens. So in this video, we're gonna get into the dimensions and what it's like on the wrist, and we're really gonna get into the details of all the tiny changes and how each of them have improved the watch over the outgoing SPB143. Oh, and I'll be checking if the bracelets are compatible with each other. So yeah, let's just get into it. Dimensions and on the wrist impressions are usually important, but more so here because the 453 is so similar yet so surprisingly different to the 143 in real life. Well, I mean, as different as things can be for two watches that are basically the same. We've got an identical case width of 40.1 millimeters and a bezel width of 39.4 millimeters versus the 143's 40.1 millimeters, which is nearly a millimeter smaller, so it is a subtly noticeable difference. And another dimension that's been slightly reduced is the lug to lug, 46.5 millimeters versus 47.6 millimeters for the SPB143. Technically, the thickness has been reduced down to 13.2 millimeters from 13.9 millimeters, but the reduction is deceiving, as I'll get into later on in the case section. But what does make a critical visual difference, which is more important, is that the mid case is 5.5 millimeters versus 6.5 millimeters on the 143. So at the start, I assumed that the case was the exact same as the 143 case, or maybe just like barely tweaked. But from day one, and more so when I saw it next to the 143, it just looked a bit smaller. And I thought it was just me, but turns out they actually made the watch smaller in every single way. And this squeezing of the dimensions led to a huge upgrade for me, which is that the 453 now weighs 157 grams on the bracelet versus 175 grams for the 143. It has completely transformed the watch for me for the better, because it still looks and feels solid, but now it's just what it should have been from the start. This SPB453 is now the 40mm Seiko watch that I've always wanted it to be and expected it to be. When I wear a watch like this, I want it to look relatively thin and also feel super comfy on the watch, on the wrist, and I don't have to really worry about it. The SPB143 just wasn't quite that. It was just too unnecessarily heavy and it felt thick. There's just no reason why a simple 40mm watch with 20mm lugs should weigh as much as a 42.5mm SKX on a 22mm bracelet and as much as a 42mm Captain Willard with that chunky case. But going on in terms of specs, we get an extra 2 hours of power reserve, which is why we officially see 3 days on the dial, which I can do without. But the good thing is that mine is gaining about 5 to 6 seconds a day, which is great. Oh, and then how can I forget? Thank God we have an extra 100 meters of water resistance, because we all needed that for when we go diving to where nuclear submarines hang out, or when it just rains a little bit harder outside. So there's that. And now into the case and bezel. Bezel first though, it's got a classic coin edge grip, and the black insert is a matte black one, and it's not radially brushed like on the 143, and all the markings on it are crispy white, whereas they're a bit less intensely white. I mean, they're not really gray, I would say, but like they're just a little less intensely white on the 143, and that makes quite a difference because it's more legible and it just looks more modern and clean, that the 453 that is. So yeah, thumbs up for that. And I love that it's now a fully graduated bezel, because on the SPB143 we lose out on 3 dots at the 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. And it's something that's always bothered me a bit on any Seiko that has a sort of bezel, not just this one. And that just might be a me thing, but I'm still glad to see these little minor changes made. And now onto the case. It's Seiko's take on a classic skin diver case. Main difference in this is the flowy case sides, and also the way the underside tapers down to the wrist. Like I mentioned before, the thickness is down to 13.2 millimeters, but they took a shortcut, kind of like Tudor did after the first Black Bay 58, you know, just a flatter case back and reduced the crystal a little bit. The case back wave logo is now debossed, so it's flush with the case back, which makes no difference on the wrist. And then they also made the crystal a little bit flatter and just doesn't jut out as much. So then I was curious, I checked the height of each watch without the wave bump and without the crystal, and they are both exactly the same, 12.3 millimeters. So I'm just thinking, like, why didn't they just put in a flat sapphire crystal and claim it to be even thinner than it is? Probably could have gotten it down to the 12s. But all that being said, it goes to show how much of a difference a recontoured, thinner mid case makes visually, considering that that's essentially the only thing that is actually changed. And the best way to notice the thinner mid case through the screen is to look at the drilled lugs and to see how much space there is on the lugs above and below the drilled lug hole. So big difference over there. Bravo, Seiko. Also, just to be clear, I never really had an issue with the height of the SPB143, but rather the weight of it, which I think I made very clear a little bit earlier. But anyways, a thinner looking watch is always going to be a plus point for me. Now onwards to the dial, and not that much has changed here design-wise. Of course, the big change here is that it's now a matte black dial with the subtlest of sunburst finishes. And I'm glad the sunburst finish is very subtle, because I think a matte black dial suits the clean tool watch look of this monochromatic watch. Not everything has to be sunburst. Having the sunburst gray dial on the 143 worked, as it was part of its identity, but I hate it when sunburst dials have that matte layer on top of it. And I noticed that Tudor has that happening on the Pelagos 39, and I saw that Tag did it on one of their Carrera glass boxes. So I'm guessing there's an actual reason to it, not just cheaping out, but it doesn't make me like it anymore. The hands and indices remain the same as the ones on the 143, which is to say that they are still fantastic. These hands are amongst my all-time favorites, especially because of that half-brushed, half-polished finish that Seiko does on their SPB watches. So zooming out, overall, we have a far more contrasty and crisp execution of the dial and the bezel, for that matter. And this is the main reason why I would choose this 453 over even a new gray dial version, because the 143 just didn't have this level of tool watch legibility and contrast. It was still really good, but just not to this level. Next up, the date window. And there will be folks out there who think that the 430 date window is just like the worst thing that's ever happened to humanity. But I'm in the minority, because I think that the 430 date window is great, and it's only great since it's a well executed 430 date window. It's color matched, and it's in the center of the two indices. And it gets big bonus points for it being level as well, which isn't seen very often. So all in all, the date window completely fades away and disappears, since the numbers are kind of grayish. They aren't just super white. When you need it, it's there. And the big plus point for me is that we get to have all the indices without interruption. No missing 3 or 6 o'clock markers, you know, or halfway cut or set off to the side. Speaking of which, here's a lume shot. The strength and clarity is the same as the 143 lume, which is to say that it's great lume as we'd expect from Seiko LumiBrite. But as you can see, we get a full 12 indices here, instead of the 3 o'clock lume plot being shoved right to the edge and away from the overall flow of the indices. Also, small detail, but I like the typeface of Divers 200 on the 143 more than the typeface of Divers 300 on the 453. It just doesn't have the same personality. And now the bracelet. And to be honest, at first I threw it on my favorite FKM rubber strap, because I wanted to wear it quickly, I had to go outside, and I didn't want to go through sizing the bracelet, and also because it just looks really, really great on the rubber strap. But mainly, I also wasn't particularly excited about the bracelet, because in my mind, I was thinking that it was the same bracelet from the SPB143, which was just too thick and too heavy for the watch, and it just bothered me immensely on that watch. But thankfully, that is not the case here with this bracelet. Yes. The bracelet itself looks almost identical to the bracelet found on the SPB143 and the Captain Willards. It's a 3-link bracelet with rounded links. It looks good, you know, simple, but good. Then I noticed that it's actually the updated bracelet with the thinner and shorter links like on the Marinemaster 200 GMT, and I cannot tell you strongly enough how much this has improved the experience for me, because all the issues of the bracelet looking too thick for a felt watch and it being too unnecessarily heavy for what it is now all gone. Now the bracelet looks like it was made for this watch, and it's just so much more proportionate, and the weight of the entire watch has gone down as a result. You know, the watch head, like I've mentioned before, is 10 grams less, and the bracelet takes on the rest of that nearly 20-gram weight difference. Now on the wrist, I have no complaints. It's comfortable, it's solid, it looks good, although I'll always be asking for a 4mm taper on the bracelet. I am hoping that Uncle Straps and Strapcode are already in the process of making bracelets for this, but I'm not really in a rush because this now feels like a complete watch. And that led me to be curious, and I tried this bracelet on the 143 to see what it would look like, and also if the 143 bracelets would work on the 453, but it won't work, unfortunately, because there's a bit of a gap, which means that the 143 end links are too big for the 453. So there you have it. Let me know what you think about the SPB453 down in the comments, and until the next video, good day.